Hello and welcome back to Scholastically Natalie, where we talk about books, writing, reading, D&D, and sometimes other things. Today we're continuing on with my series about Twilight, The Roasting. This is of course the popular young adult novel written by Stephenie Meyer. I might slip up and call her Meyer because that's what it looks like to me, and pronunciation is not my thing, so I'll apologize in advance for that. I'll also warn you in advance that, much like in my other video, I have no personal preferences for Twilight. I, in fact, have personal againsts. I've never liked it until I became an adult and figured I'd try to read it. So I will warn you, I think this book is hilarious, and not because the characters are funny. I simply don't like it. So I figure before you embark on this journey with me, it will definitely be a bit more sassy and sarcastic than I, one, usually am, and two, if you like the book, you might not want to listen to this. But I will be going through it, and we will be talking about why I like certain things, why I don't like other things, and if you hear any ripping noises, that's me pulling all my sticky notes off so I can read what's underneath, because that's just the way I analyze books. Although I suppose in this case it's more of an annotation. Additionally, you'll probably hear sniffing and or coughing because I'm still getting over a sinus infection, and because of that my voice is still kind of croaky and doesn't like it when I talk a lot. So there will also be pausing for liquids. With all that aside, we're gonna begin with Chapter 1, First Sight. My mother drove me to the airport with the windows rolled down. It was 75 degrees in Phoenix, the sky a perfect, cloudless blue. I was wearing my favorite shirt, sleeveless, white eyelet lace. I was wearing it as a farewell gesture. My carry-on item was a parka. I actually noted this sentence. Oop, I'm gonna cough. Need some liquid. I actually wrote down the sentence because I liked it. This is a great way to introduce the setting. It's appropriately dramatic to hook your attention and try to figure out what's making her move. It's appropriately descriptive, and, it gives a good weight as to where we're coming from and where we're going, and the fact that we already know she is somewhat resentful of the fact she's moving. In the Olympic Peninsula of northwest Washington state, a small town named Forks exists under a near-constant cover of clouds. It rains on this inconsequential town more than any other place in the United States of America. It was from this town and its gloomy, omnipresent shade that my mother escaped with me when I was only a few months old. It was in this town that I'd been compelled to spend a month every summer until I was 14. And here we already have a lot of very connotative negative language that already gives you an entire story in and of itself of how Bella feels about Forks. And so I just thought that it was a good way to point this out. I like having unreliable narrators, and so I like having narrators having strong biases and personal opinions, although not that Bella has that many. That was the year I finally put my foot down. These past 3 summers, my dad, Charlie, vacationed with me in California. Oh, sorry, that's not the end of the sentence. In California for 2 weeks instead. It was to Forks that I now exiled myself, an action that I took with great horror. I detested Forks. I loved Phoenix. I loved the sun and the blistering heat. I loved the vigorous, sprawling city. And here I noted these 2 very short paragraphs because I was like, somehow I already picked this up. This was 2 completely unnecessary paragraphs that just tell the reader that you don't trust them to pick up on any implications. Bella, my mom said to me the last of 1,000 times before I got on the plane, you don't have to do this. My mom looks like me, which I also circled as a very helpful sentence because, we don't know what Bella looks like. except with short hair and laugh lines. I felt a spasm of panic as I stared at her wide, childlike eyes. How could I leave my loving, erratic, harebrained mother to fend for herself? Of course, she had Phil now, so the bills would get paid, there would be food in the refrigerator, gas in her car, and someone to call when she got lost. But still. And I mean, wow. We see a lot of, like, parentification of the child, which, if you don't know, is where the child becomes the parent of their actual parent. But, I mean, here, she's not a 5-year-old. Like, what? And I mean, like, for me, this is, how in the world did Renee get custody if she is apparently the biggest idiot to ever exist in the entire universe and can't even take care of herself enough to put gas in her own car, when Charlie's a police officer? Like, the comparison's insane. I mean, personally, I think, yes, if Renee had, like, an extremely busy job, or, like, she was working 3 jobs, could be excused. But yeah, this is, like, the worst introduction to a parent ever. And again, I realize that we have to do parentification because in young adult novels, the kids are young enough that they need parents, but they also need a reason to not have the parents involved if we're going for that kind of vibe, because most teenagers don't want to be independent from their parents, so they don't want to be like, the solution to everything is to involve your mom and dad. Ah, ha, ha, ha. And so, like, they too want to dream of, you know, adventures where your parents don't tell you what to do. But this is like, yeah, I don't need my mom because I've been taking care of her for 14 years of my life. Like, how did this one manage when Bella was an actual child? And this also gives us a very good insight into Bella's inability to exist without molding into another person and making her life about theirs. She's been doing it for her mom for years and is a consequence of that parentification. Probably not a super obvious one. I don't even know if Stephenie Meyer is doing it on purpose. But it's a very interesting concept. I want to go, I lied. I'd always been a bad liar, but I'd been saying this lie so frequently that it sounded almost convincing now. And I love this sentence. I think it's great. My only critique is that in the dialogue before it, I wouldn't use the dialogue tag "I lied" because you're making it clear in this sentence that she's lying. You could just say "I said." That's fine. Tell Charlie I said hi. I will. I'll see you soon, she insisted. You can come home whenever you want. I'll come right back as soon as you need me. And, like, that's the other weird thing, is that, like, Bella's, like, basically, like, sending her mom off on her own life with her new husband, which is so weird. And additionally, I have my tiny note that says, I've also never understood calling parents by their first name. I don't know, I grew up with a relatively happy home. I've never felt the need to distance myself from their parents by calling them by their first name, but it's also completely fair of Bella, for having only spent 2 weeks with her father for the majority of her young life, to not really feel like he's her dad, so then she would want to call him Charlie. But I don't know, it's weird to me, whatever. But I could see the sacrifice in her eyes behind the promise. And here I wrote, can you, or are you a martyr with low enough self-esteem to kill a small child? Because that's what it's starting to feel like. Don't worry about me, I urged. It'll be great. I love you, Mom. She hugged me tightly for a minute, and then I got on the plane, and she was gone. It's a 4-hour flight from Phoenix to Seattle, another hour in a small plane up to Port Angeles, and then an hour drive back down to Forks. Flying doesn't bother me. The hour in the car with Charlie, though, I was a little worried about. Charlie had really been fairly nice about the whole thing. He seemed genuinely pleased that I was coming to live with him for the first time with any degree of permanence. He'd already gotten me registered for high school and was going to help me get a car. Which, you know, is really sweet. But it was sure to be awkward with Charlie. Neither of us was what anyone would call verbose, and I didn't know what there was to say regardless. I knew he was more than a little confused by my decision. Like my mother before me, I hadn't made a secret of my distaste for forks. When I landed in Port Angeles, it was raining. I didn't see it as an omen, just unavoidable. I'd already said my goodbyes to the sun. And I really like this paragraph. I think it's nice. I like that we're not seeing the rain as an omen and it's just going to be there constantly. I think that's really funny. And I think I'd already said goodbyes to the sun is like very appropriately dramatic for what Bella's already shown us she is. Charlie was waiting for me with the cruiser. This I was expecting too. Charlie is the police chief swan to the good people of Forks. My primary motivation behind buying a car, despite the scarcity of my funds, was that I refused to be driven around town in a car with red and blue lights on top. Nothing slows down traffic like a cop. Here I just put a question mark and said not really lol, because I too live in a small town, and I feel like Stephenie Meyer hasn't. But also, like most cops I know, have at least one alternative car that's not a cop car. Just to, like, avoid vandalism and stuff, so I think the concept that he doesn't have a non-police car is funny. Charlie gave me an awkward one-armed hug when I stumbled my way off the plane. "It's good to see you, Bells," he said, smiling as he automatically caught and steadied me. "You haven't changed much. How's Renee?" "Mom's fine. It's good to see you too, Dad." I wasn't allowed to call him Charlie to his face, which, like, yeah, of course he wouldn't want you to call him Charlie to his face. I had only a few bags. Most of my Arizona clothes were too permeable for Washington. My mom and I had pooled our resources to supplement my winter wardrobe, but it was still scanty. It all fit easily into the trunk of the cruiser. "I found a good car for you, really cheap," he announced when we were strapped in. What kind of car? I was suspicious of the way he said good car for you, as opposed to just a good car. "Well, it's a truck, actually. A Chevy." "Where did you find it?" "Do you remember Billy Black down at La Push?" La Push is the tiny Indian reservation on the coast. "No." "He used to go fishing with us during the summer," Charlie prompted. That would explain why I didn't remember him. I do a good job of blocking painful, unnecessary things from my memory. Here I noted, dude, so rude, but also very funny. "He's in a wheelchair now," Charlie continued when I didn't respond, "so he can't drive anymore, and he offered to sell me his truck cheap." "What year is it?" I could see from his change of expression that this was the question he was hoping I wouldn't ask. "Well, Billy's done a lot of work on the engine. It's only a few years old, really." I hoped he didn't think so little of me as to believe I would give up that easily. "When did he buy it?" "He bought it in 1984, I think." "Did he buy it new?" "Well, no. I think it was new in the early 60s, or late 50s at the earliest," he admitted sheepishly. Dad, I don't really know anything about cars. I wouldn't be able to fix it if anything went wrong, and I couldn't afford a mechanic. Really, Bella, the thing runs great. They don't build them like that anymore." The thing, I thought to myself, it had possibilities. As a nickname, at the very least. How cheap is cheap? After all, that was the part I couldn't compromise on. "Well, honey, I kind of already bought it for you, as a homecoming gift." Charlie peeked sideways at me with a hopeful expression, to which I wrote, "Aw." Wow, free. Here I'm caught between not being sure whether she's, like, being sarcastic or not, which is most of this, like, weird car interaction, because she doesn't tell us anything about her inner feelings as she does this, so, like, I have no clue, and a lot of these statements are very easy to mistake as sarcasm. "You didn't need to do that, Dad. I was going to buy myself a car." "I don't mind. I want you to be happy here." He was looking ahead at the road when he said this. Charlie wasn't comfortable with expressing his emotions out loud. I inherited that from him. So I was looking straight ahead as I responded. Which, like, a big mood. I, too, have to look ahead at the road if I'm having emotional conversations with literally anybody in my car. "That's really nice, Dad. Thanks. I really appreciate it." No need to add on that my being happy in Forks is an impossibility. He didn't need to suffer along with me. Which, like, wow, way to ruin a moment. Thanks, honey. And I never looked a free truck in the mouth. Or engine, which I did snicker at a little bit. And here, like, my entire impression of, like, this interaction was Charlie. "Oh, I want you to be happy here. Hi, it's great to see you." And Bella's like, "Wow, you bought me a truck that's old?" I don't know. So it was a bit interesting to me. Well, now, you're welcome, he mumbled, embarrassed by my thanks. We exchanged a few more comments on the weather, which was wet, and that was pretty much it for conversation. We stared out the windows in silence. It was beautiful, of course. I couldn't deny that. Everything was green. The trees, their trunks covered with moss, their branches hanging with a canopy of it, the ground covered with ferns, even the air filtered down greenly through the leaves. It was too green. An alien planet. And, I both love and hate the contradicting ideas here that it's, beautiful and that it's also, an alien planet. Because, I think the comparison's good, but I also hate it. Eventually, we made it to Charlie's. He still lived in the small 2-bedroom house that he'd bought with my mother in the early days of their marriage. Those were the only kind of days their marriage had. The early ones. And I love this sentence. So good at establishing the relationship. There, parked on the street in front of the house that never changed, was my new to me, truck. And my family makes the exact same joke. It was a faded red color with big rounded fenders and a bulbous cab. To my intense surprise, I loved it. I didn't know if it would run, but I could see myself in it. Plus, it was one of those solid iron affairs that never gets damaged. The kind you see at the scene of an accident, paint unscratched, surrounded by the pieces of the foreign car it had destroyed. And I love that description of the truck. I think it's great. Wow, Dad, I love it. Thanks. Now my horrific day tomorrow would be that much less dreadful. I wouldn't be faced with the choice of either walking 2 miles in the rain to school or accepting a ride in the Chief's cruiser. And there I wrote, "Wow, you're so pessimistic." "I'm glad you like it," Charlie said gruffly, embarrassed again. It took only one trip to get all my stuff upstairs. I got the west bedroom that faced out over the front yard. The room was familiar. It had been belonged to me since I was born. And there I found a typo. The wooden floor, the light blue walls, the peaked ceiling, the yellowed lace curtains around the window, these were all part of my childhood. The only changes Charlie had ever made were switching the crib for a bed and adding a desk as I grew. The desk now held a second-hand computer with the phone line for the modem stapled along the floor to the nearest phone jack. This was a stipulation from my mother, so that we could stay in touch easily. The rocking chair from my baby days was still in the corner. And here I thought it was interesting because this really shows Charlie's nostalgia for her childhood and how, he would have wanted her to been there more because he never, redid the room, even though she only stayed with him for, 2 weeks every year. And then it also shows him kind of possibly giving up on furthering their relationship because he never redoes it to, suit her tastes because of how much she probably hated forks and, didn't like staying with him, which is kind of sad. And then it also implies, of course, that he doesn't have a ton of money, which we kind of got from the beginning of this anyways. There was only one small bathroom at the top of the stairs, which I would have to share with Charlie. I was trying not to dwell too much on that fact. And here I just noted, so what? He is probably going to be up before you. I know my parents were when I was going to high school. And if he's not, he's going to be leaving after you. One of the best things about Charlie is he doesn't hover. He left me alone to unpack and get settled, a feat that would have been altogether impossible for my mother. It was nice to be alone, to not have to smile and look pleased, which is again with the parentification of her mom. Sometimes I have to be oh yeah, everything's great for my mom when she's anxious about whether something is good or not, but it's not I'm sitting there going no, I'm really sad, Mom, and I promise it's fine. My mom would never sit there and be oh, I can't believe how much your sadness is affecting me, which I feel is what is up with her mom, because there's only one reason you don't express yourself to your parents. They make it about them. A relief to stare dejectedly out the window at the sheeting rain and just let a few tears escape. I wasn't in the mood to go on a real crying jag. I would save that for bedtime, when I would have to think about the coming morning. And here I just wrote, oh my gosh, shut up. Forks High School had a frightening total of only 357, now 58 students. There were more than 700 people in my junior class alone back home. And here I just wrote, lol, welcome to small towns, baby, because this is how I grew up. Their grandparents had been toddlers together, and coming from one of those small towns, that is a little extreme. Some people knew each other from childhood, but those were people who were usually related. I would be the new girl from the big city, a curiosity, a freak. And here I wrote, so much low self-esteem. Maybe if I looked like a girl from Phoenix should, I could work this to my advantage. But physically, I'd never fit in anywhere. I should be tan, sporty, blonde, a volleyball player, or a cheerleader perhaps. All the things that go with living in the Valley of the Sun. Which, like, what? You had no diversity at your school at all? Everybody was white with blonde hair and athletic? Okay. Out of 700 people, all of them were the exact same. Wild. And here I also wrote, you don't even know what the people at Forks look like. And also, considering it's cloudy, I think all of them are going to be pale too. Unless, of course, they have melanin or something else that colors their skin. Instead, I was ivory-skinned without even the excuse of blue eyes or red hair, despite the constant sunshine. I had always been slender, but soft somehow, obviously not an athlete. I didn't have the necessary hand-eye coordination to play sports, without humiliating myself, and harming both myself and anyone else who stood too close. And here my little note was, oh, so you're sunburned constantly, because I am pale as a ghost, and if I leave the house, it's sunburn. And also, I wrote, oh no, I'm pale with dark hair. Such a unique look. You mean the other stereotype of European central beauty standards? When I finished putting my clothes in the old pine dresser, I took my bag of bathroom necessities and went to the communal bathroom to clean myself up after the day of travel. And here I circled communal because there's only 2 of you. It's shared at most. You're not hosting an army. You're not in a dorm. I looked at my face in the mirror as I brushed through my tangled, damp hair. Which, like, if you have long hair, R.I.P. My hair's, like, really straight, and when it was long, if it got wet, that was awful to untangle, especially from rain. Maybe it was the light, but I already looked sallower, unhealthy. My skin could be pretty. It was very clear, almost translucent looking, but it all depended on color. I had no color here. And again, I like the oh, my skin I already look unhealthy. Oh, I have no color at all. Because it's showing how the color's draining out of her world. But at the same time, why is your skin translucent? Again, I'm probably one of the palest people I've ever bumped into, along with my other friend who's allergic to the sun, who might be paler than I am. If I was translucent, my doctor would be sending me to see someone. But, I guess good for you for not having acne issues. My genetics did not allow me the same thing. Facing my pallid reflection in the mirror, I was forced to admit that I was lying to myself. It wasn't just physically that I'd never fit in. Again, what is with this? I'm sorry, I'm so stuck on it, but you are white with long black hair. What? How are you not fitting in anywhere? Insanity. And if I couldn't find a niche in a school with 3,000 people, what were my chances here? Well, if everybody at your 3,000 person school was somehow blonde and tan, I think moving somewhere where it's really dark all the time will work well for you finding pale people to fit in with, since you're so concerned about everybody's skin color. I didn't relate well to people my age. Maybe the truth was that I didn't relate well to people, period. Which, mood. Even my mother, who I was closer to than anyone else on the planet. was never in harmony with me, never on exactly the same page. Sometimes I wondered if I was seeing the same things through my eyes that the rest of the world was seeing through theirs. Maybe there was a glitch in my brain. But the cause didn't matter. And I sat here and I was like, but the cause definitely does matter. If you're having psychological issues or like weird processing issues, please go see a psychologist or a mental health professional immediately. All that mattered was the effect, and tomorrow would be just the beginning. And here was the weird part for me, because the first time I read this didn't really register it, but the end of that sentence of, and tomorrow would be just the beginning, would make sense if we were pondering school, which we kind of are. But this immediate paragraph in front of it is, I'm bad at relating to people and there's a glitch in my brain. And so then, like, when you get to the, like, and tomorrow would be just the beginning, it kind of feels like you're saying, and tomorrow would be just the beginning of, like, seeing things through the glitch in my brain, or this glitch in my brain becoming active. It was just very weirdly phrased for me. I didn't sleep well that night, even after I was done crying, which, like, also a mood. The reason I don't sleep well after crying is because I can't breathe out of my nose. The constant whooshing of the rain and wind across the roof wouldn't fade into the background. I pulled the faded old quilt over my head and later added the pillow, too. But I couldn't fall asleep until after midnight, when the rain finally settled into a quieter drizzle, which, like, is such a mood. I have such a hard time falling asleep in, like, new places. But even when I'm at home, I have to be in, like, one specific position or else I am not sleeping. Thick fog was all I could see out my window in the morning, and I could feel the claustrophobia creeping up on me. You could never see the sky here. It was like a cage. And here, I really like this description. However, my only critique is that personally, I find similes, comparisons using like or as, to be a little basic. I prefer metaphors, and I think that would have sounded better. Just me. Breakfast with Charlie was a quiet event. He wished me good luck at school. I thanked him, knowing his hope was wasted. Good luck tended to avoid me, which, like, mood, but also shut up. Good luck tends to avoid me in that I got stuck in the longest line at grocery stores. Not that, like, my entire life is an unfortunate event. Charlie left first, off to the police station that was his wife and family, which I thought was interesting because she's, like, saying that she, like, resents him his job, but, like, it's also pretty obvious that it was all he had left after her mother took her and left. Which I think is kind of interesting to see, that, like, incredibly biased and, like, self-centered perspective. I don't know, thought it was interesting. Like, obviously her parents didn't break up just because her mom hated living in Forks. Like, I don't know, she, like, approaches this like if Charlie had just moved down with them, but, like, at the same time, what? Oh, yeah, that was my point where I was telling her to shut up. Okay. After he left, I sat at the old square oak table in one of the 3 unmatching chairs and examined his small kitchen, with its dark paneled walls, bright yellow cabinets, white linoleum floor. Nothing was changed. 1, I love this description. So good. 2, I like this representation of Charlie's either inability or unwillingness to move on, clinging to the past, perhaps an indicator of loneliness, which is just sad. Charlie's kind of sad. My mother had painted the cabinets 18 years ago in an attempt to bring some sunshine into the house. Over the small fireplace in the adjoining handkerchief-sized family room was a row of pictures. First, a wedding picture of Charlie and my mom in Las Vegas, then one of the 3 of us in the hospital after I was born, taken by a helpful nurse, followed by the procession of my school pictures up to last year's. Those were embarrassing to look at. I would have to see what I could do to get Charlie to put them somewhere else, at least while I was living here. Also a mood. I don't know, personally my parents have always kept just only our most recent ones and kind of like replaced them, but I've been to a couple of my friends' houses and it's just like, it's usually on the wall up the stairs that they put them, or like, you know, fun family photos over the years. I don't know, I think it's kind of cute. It was impossible, being in this house, not to realize that Charlie had never gotten over my mom. It made me uncomfortable. One, I think this could have been a lot better phrased, at least the first part of it. Mostly because, yes, it's obvious that Charlie probably hasn't gotten over her mom, but I think less in the romantic sense and more like his life's just like super empty, because he has a family that he's attached to. I don't think I would say that he's still emotionally attached to her, but of course I haven't finished the series. And then additionally, I also thought this was really ironic foreshadowing, considering the fact that Bella latches onto Edward so fast and will not get over him when he does leave her, and I think that is so funny. I didn't want to be too early to school, but I couldn't stay in the house anymore. Oh yeah, those bright yellow cabinets. I donned my jacket, which had the feel of a biohazard suit, which made me go, what? And headed out into the rain. It was just drizzling still, not enough to soak me through immediately as I reached for the house key that was always hidden under the eaves by the door, and locked up. I like that small detail. The sloshing of my new waterproof boots was unnerving. I missed the normal crunch of gravel as I walked. I couldn't pause and admire my truck again as I wanted. I was in a hurry to get out of the misty wet that swirled around my head and clung to my hair under my hood. If there's not a sequence about Bella's hair freezing when it's cold outside, I will be salty in this series. Inside the truck, it was nice and dry. Either Billy or Charlie had obviously cleaned it up, but the tan upholstered seats still smelled faintly of tobacco, gasoline, and peppermint. The engine started quickly to my relief, but loudly, roaring to life and then idling at top volume. Well, a truck this old was bound to have a flaw, much like our protagonist whose only flaw is her clumsiness. The antique radio worked, a plus I hadn't expected. Finding the school wasn't difficult, though I'd never been there before. The school was, like most other things, just off the highway. It was not obvious that it was a school. Only the sign, which declared it to be the Forks High School, made me stop. It looked like a collection of matching houses, built with maroon-colored bricks. There were so many trees and shrubs I couldn't see its size at first. Where was the feel of the institution? I wondered nostalgically. Where were the chain-link fences, the metal detectors? And here I wrote, LOL, small towns, baby. I parked in front of the first building, which had a small sign over the door reading front office. No one else was parked there, so I was sure it was off limits. But I decided I would get directions inside instead of circling around in the rain like an idiot. I stepped unwillingly out of the toasty truck cab and walked down a little stone path lined with dark hedges. I took a deep breath before opening the door. And this school area sounds so freaking cute, but also really old and, like, underkept, because, as most old school buildings are. Inside, it was brightly lit and warmer than I'd hoped. The office was small, a little waiting area with padded folding chairs, orange-flecked commercial carpet, notices and awards cluttering the walls, a big clock ticking loudly. Plants grew everywhere in large plastic pots, as if there wasn't enough greenery outside. The room was cut in half by a long counter cluttered with wire baskets full of papers and brightly colored flyers taped to its front. There were 3 desks behind the counter, one of which was manned by a large, red-haired woman wearing glasses. She was wearing a purple t-shirt, which immediately made me feel overdressed. Which is also funny because, like, that's generally not allowed at most school districts. But I can't say one of the interesting things that I have noticed developed in, like, schools when they've gotten a grant to get remodeled, which happened a lot in my community and the surrounding communities. A lot of places included, like, bulletin boards along the front of the counter, which was super nice. The red-haired woman looked up. "Can I help you?" I'm Isabella Swan," I informed her, and saw the immediate awareness light her eyes. I was expected, a topic of gossip, no doubt. Sorry, that was my alarm. Daughter of the chief's flighty ex-wife, come home at last. Uh, she's just acting like she's so important, and that's so funny to me because, like, yeah, a new person's a new person to, like, a small town school, but it's not like, oh my god, my math teacher's son is coming to school. Like, it's never anything that big a deal. And also, like, she's, like, constantly doing that, like, making herself, like, a much bigger deal than she needs to be, which could be both an indicator of ego, which I personally think it is, or an indicator of, like, immediate anxiety, but I feel like Meyer chose to have her be, like, anxious, but, like, only in a certain way, which is, oh my god, everybody hates me and everything is, like, the worst possible thing ever, and not, like, you know, a different way. I don't know. It was just really weird and I don't like it. Of course, she said. She dug through a precariously stacked pile of documents on her desk till she found the ones she was looking for. I have your schedule right here, and a map of the school. She brought several sheets to the counter to show me. She went through my classes for me, highlighting the best route to each on the map, and gave me a slip to have each teacher sign, which I was to bring back at the end of the day. She smiled at me and hoped, like Charlie, that I would like it here in Forks. I smiled back as convincingly as I could. I don't know, generally, you can get matched up with people in high school, or at least one person to, like, show you around, and especially in small towns, which I have done for, like, new people. And, like, they'll get a different person each class to, like, escort you places. Like, it's not a big deal. And honestly, most of the kids in my grade and I all had very similar schedules, shockingly enough. When I went back out to my truck, other students were starting to arrive. I drove around the school, following the line of traffic. I was glad to see that most of the cars were older like mine, nothing flashy. At home, I'd lived in one of the few lower-income neighborhoods that were included in the Paradise Valley district. It was a common thing to see a new Mercedes or Porsche in the student lot. The nicest car here was a shiny Volvo, and it stood out. Still, I cut the engine as soon as I was in a spot so the thunderous volume wouldn't draw attention to me. I looked at the map in the truck, trying to memorize it now. Hopefully I wouldn't have to walk around with it stuck in front of my nose all day. I stuffed everything in my bag, slung the strap over my shoulder, and sucked in a huge breath. I can do this, I lied to myself feebly. Oop. No one was going to bite me. And I just put, lol. I liked this. This was really funny. It made me laugh. I finally exhaled and stepped out of the truck. I kept my face pulled back into my hood as I walked the sidewalk crowded with teenagers. My plain black jacket didn't stand out, I noticed with relief. My spot here was, why on earth would a plain black jacket stand out? Oh my goodness. Once I got around the cafeteria, Building 3 was easy to spot. A large black 3 was painted on a white square on the east corner. I felt my breathing gradually creeping towards hyperventilation as I approached the door. I tried holding my breath as I followed 2 unisex raincoats through the door. The classroom was small. The people in front of me stopped just inside the door to hang up their coats on a long row of hooks. I copied them. And here I did note that I was just confused about, like, the structure of the school. So, like, did they arrange everybody's schedule so they ended up back in the first building they started in? Do they not have buses? Do they not have lockers? How does this school work? I copied them. They were 2 girls, one a porcelain-colored blonde, the other also pale with light brown hair. At least my skin wouldn't be a standout here. I said, yes, you are so pale. And then my next thing was, you literally said there was no sun here. Of course everyone is pale. I took the slip up to the teacher, a tall, balding man whose desk had a nameplate identifying him as Mr. Mason. He gawked, and I'm like, why are they so shocked? New people go to places. At me when he saw my name, not an encouraging response. And of course, I flushed tomato red because she's just so shy. But at least he sent me to an empty desk at the back without introducing me to the class. It was harder for my new classmates to stare at me in the back, but somehow they managed. I kept my eyes down on the reading list the teacher had given me. It was fairly basic. Bronte, Shakespeare, Chaucer, Faulkner. I'd already read everything. This was comforting and boring. I wondered if my mom would send me my folder of old essays, or if she would think that was cheating. I went through different arguments with her in my head while the teacher droned on. And here I was like, of course, the uneducated, simple country folk couldn't have a caught-up curriculum to the city. But also, like, why is she so boring? So she doesn't have any friends back home, and all she's done is read classic literature. No wonder she's so annoying. I say this as a person who likes classic literature and doesn't have that many friends, but, like, oh my god. Especially as a high schooler. But also, like, why is Renee gonna be the voice of reason in this case? Your mom's, like, the most immature human in existence. When the bell rang... Oh, sorry. My additional one was, OMG, she's not like other girls. She reads classic lit. And then I was like, I also have yet to meet someone who did this voluntarily in high school, including myself. Like, I've definitely been forced to read classic lit in high school, and I did enjoy some of it, but, like, I didn't choose it myself. When the bell rang, a nasal buzzing sound, a gangly boy with skin problems and hair black as an oil slick leaned across the aisle to talk to me. You're Isabella Swan, aren't you? He looked like the overly helpful chess club type. My response was, oh no, they're all gonna judge me by how I look. And she's over here judging everybody by how they look. Bella, I corrected. Everyone within a 3-seat radius turned to look at me. Did I? Yeah. No, okay. Sorry. Where's your next class? He asked. I had to check in my bag. Government with Jefferson in Building 6. There was nowhere to look without meeting curious eyes. I'm headed toward Building 4. I could show you the way. Definitely overly helpful. I'm Eric, he added. I was just like, didn't you just say that you didn't want the map in your face? But also I realized that she was doing it in the hope she also wouldn't have to talk to anybody. I smiled tentatively. Thanks. We got our jackets and headed out into the rain, which had picked up. I could have sworn several people behind us were walking close enough to eavesdrop. I hoped I wasn't getting paranoid. And I just said, too late, you've already been surrounded in a classroom with them. And then here's my sticky note about it, where I said, I know Meyer does not know how small towns work because of this paragraph. One thing you need to know when entering a small town school is that everybody knows everybody, especially because the majority of us have grown up with each other. So we're all friends, and we all know people you don't expect us to. And the biggest thing is that when we get new people, we generally just leave them alone and let a couple people talk to them, and they just get absorbed into whatever friend group they get absorbed into. And then we all still find out about them because we tell each other everything. So, like, no, she shouldn't be getting swarmed by people or, like, stared at because, like, most people don't do that. You just got, like, one or two people who talk to you every single class, and they might be different people, and then you just go to lunch with people until you find ones you get along with. So this is a lot different than Phoenix, huh? He asked. Very. It doesn't rain much there, does it? 3 or 4 times a year. Wow, what must that be like? He wondered. Sunny, I told him. You don't look very tan. My mother is part albino. I just wrote such a good conversationalist. Wow, sparkling wit. He studied my face apprehensively, and I sighed. It looked like clouds, and his sense of humor didn't mix. A few months of this, and I'd forget how to use sarcasm, and then I just said, shut up, OMG, again. I was like, that's so annoying. But also, guess what? If you live in a depressing tiny town with a bunch of rain, of course you're going to be sarcastic. Our total amount of humor back in, like, high school was just deadpan sarcasm. But also... He might just assume you're telling the truth. We walked back around the cafeteria to the south, buildings by the gym. Eric walked me right to the door, even though it was clearly marked. Well, good luck, he said as I touched the handle. Maybe we'll have some other classes together. He sounded hopeful. Well, pardon him for wanting to be friends with you. Oh my goodness, how terrible. I smiled at him vaguely and went inside. The rest of the morning passed in about the same fashion. My trigonometry teacher, Mr. Varner, who I would have hated anyway just because of the subject he taught, was the only one who made me stand in front of the subject and introduce myself. I stammered, blushed, and tripped over my own boots on the way to my seat, and I just wrote next to it, "Hoomst," because just choose one of those things to do on your introduction. I definitely stammer on mine because I don't know, I'm not great at speaking to people, and I think too fast for my mouth to keep up on. But, like, you cannot possibly do all of this. But OMG, she's so shy. It's definitely not because she thinks she's better than everybody, despite the emotions she presents to us. After 2 classes, I started to recognize several of the faces in each class. There was always someone braver than the others who would introduce themselves and ask me questions about how I was liking forks. I tried to be diplomatic, but mostly I just lied. At least I never needed the map. The others aren't too scared to talk to you. Shockingly enough, most high schoolers aren't scared of a new person from a city. They're just not being overwhelming. One girl sat next to me in both Trig and Spanish, and she walked with me to the cafeteria for lunch. She was tiny, several inches shorter than my 5 feet 4 inches, but her wildly curly dark hair made up a lot of the difference between our heights. So, like, when you say several inches, do you just mean, like, 3? Because that's not that much shorter. I couldn't remember her name. How nice. So I smiled and nodded as she prattled about teachers and classes. I didn't try to keep up, and here I just left a note that just says, "So effing rude." We sat at the end of a full table with several of her friends who she introduced to me. I forgot all their names as soon as she spoke them. And I said mood because I'm bad at remembering names, but also she's such a dick. They seemed impressed by her bravery in speaking to me. And then I wrote, or maybe they're just not overwhelming you like polite people. You're not too cool for them, Bella. Sorry, I got kind of rude, but, like, she's so condescending and I hate it. The boy from English, Eric, waved at me from across the room. It was there, sitting in the lunchroom, trying to make conversation with 7 curious strangers, that I first saw them. And I was like, this was definitely the big opening that Meyer was picturing when she wrote this. Like, this is the first sentence that popped in her head. Like this is the movie trailer moment in her brain. And then I was also so it's just like, how are you trying to make conversation with anybody because you can't speak to people well? They were sitting in the corner of the cafeteria. As far away from where I sat as possible in the long room. Already they hate her. There were 5 of them. They weren't talking and they weren't eating, though they each had a tray of untouched food in front of them, which isn't suspicious at all. They weren't gawking at me, unlike most of the other students, unlike those plebs, so it was safe to stare at them without fear of meeting an excessively interested pair of eyes. But it was none of these things that caught and held my attention. And I put, OMG, they're so cool because they're also antisocial pricks. They didn't look anything alike. What teenagers do look alike? I'm sorry, please take me through this step. Of the 3 boys, one was big, muscled like a serious weightlifter, with dark curly hair. Another was taller, leaner, but still muscular and honey blonde. The last was lanky, less bulky, with untidy, bronze-colored hair. He was more boyish than the others, who looked like they could be in college, or even teachers here rather than the students. I'm sorry, but if your immortal vampires look like they could be adults, why are they pretending to be teenagers? Sorry, it's just so unsubtle and stupid. Additionally, does she think people who are friends have to look alike? Is she okay? The girls were opposites. The tall one was statuesque. She had a beautiful figure, the kind you saw on the cover of the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue, the kind that made every girl around her take a hit on her self-esteem just by being in the same room. Which, like, mood. Her hair was golden, gently waving to the middle of her back. The short girl was pixie-like, thin in the extreme with small features. And here I was wondering if she should say thin to the extreme. I don't know, it just felt wrong wording-wise. Her hair was a deep black, cropped short and pointing in every direction. And yet, they were all exactly alike. Every one of them was chalky pale. The palest of all the students living in this sunless town. Again, love that description. Paler than me. The albino. You're not an albino. Why are you so hung up on your freaking skin color? Again, if you're chalky pale, please go see a doctor. They all had very dark eyes, despite the range in hair tones. Again, what is going on with her? Your hair doesn't have to match your eyes. What is... These are such weird... Like, I realize she's trying to point out the strangeness of it, but, like, at the same time, this just sounds weird. They also had dark shadows under those eyes, purplish, bruise-like shadows, as if they were all suffering from a sleepless night, or almost done recovering from a broken nose. And I just put, wow, how unusual for high school students to have bags under their eyes. And also, this is just a general lore-building question. If your vampires don't need to sleep, and thus do not sleep, like they're made to not sleep, why would they have bags under their eyes? Is it just because they're dead? Like, I'm confused by this, sorry. Though their noses, all their features, were straight, perfect, angular. My next question is, do vampires only turn supermodels, or does it make you become a supermodel? I think there was something in there about, like, something that makes them prettier to people, but whatever. But all this is not why I couldn't look away. I stared because their faces, so different, so similar, were all devastatingly, inhumanly beautiful. I like that sentence too. They were faces you never expected to see except perhaps on the airbrushed pages of a fashion magazine, or painted by an old master on the face of an angel. It was hard to decide who was the most beautiful. Maybe the perfect blonde girl or the bronze-haired boy. I just wrote bisexuality intensifies. They were all looking away from each other, away from the other students, away from anything in particular as far as I could tell. Which again, isn't weird or suspicious at all. As I watched, the small girl rose with her tray, unopened soda, unbitten apple, and walked away with a quick, graceful lope that belonged on a runway. I wrote, yeah. So not suspicious at all. I watched, amazed, at her lithe dancer's step till she dumped her tray and glided through the back door, faster than I would have thought possible. My eyes darted back to the others, who sat, unchanging. I think if you did this every day, your teachers would bring you in to talk about an eating disorder. Like, I'm not gonna lie, especially in a small town. You kidding me? Who are they? I asked the girl from my Spanish class, whose name I'd forgotten. Such a good friend already. As she looked up to see who I meant, though already knowing probably from my tone, Suddenly he looked at her, the thinner one, the boyish one, the youngest, perhaps. He looked at my neighbor for just a fraction of a second, and then his dark eyes flickered to mine. See, I like that description. He looked away quickly, more quickly than I could, though in a flush of embarrassment I dropped my eyes at once. Why are you embarrassed? I mean, I also don't like making eye contact with people, but, like, they don't make me blush if they look at me. You know, to be fair, I don't really understand people's reactions to people they find extremely attractive, so, like, I'll just pass it off as an I just don't understand thing. In that brief flash of a glance, his face held nothing of interest. It was as if she had called his name, and he'd looked up in involuntary response, already having decided not to answer. Nice foreshadowing, although clunky and kind of bonky on the heady. My neighbor giggled in embarrassment, looking at the table like I did. That's Edward and Emmett Cullen, and Rosalie and Jasper Hale. The one who left was Alice Cullen. They all lived together with Dr. Cullen and his wife. She said this under her breath. Which, like, I don't know. I don't find it weird that you'd be asking who people were in the lunchroom. I glanced sideways at the beautiful boy, who was looking at his tray now, picking a bagel to pieces with long, pale fingers. His mouth was moving very quickly, his perfect lips barely opening. The other three still looked away, and yet I felt he was speaking quietly to them. Which, like, if you're trying to not be weird, just don't be weird. Although I guess you could also argue that for having lived for hundreds of years, they have grown unused to how humans act. Strange, unpopular names, I thought. The kind of names grandparents had. But maybe that was in vogue here. Small town names? You thought wrong. I finally remembered that my neighbor was called Jessica. A perfectly common name. There were 2 girls named Jessica in my history class back home. Yeah, I think we had about 4 Alexes in my grade, which was really saying something. They are very nice looking. I struggled with a conspicuous understatement. Yes, Jessica agreed with a giggle. They're all together, though. Emmett and Rosalie and Jasper and Alice, I mean. And they live together. Her voice held all the shock and condemnation of a small town. Which, like, yeah, that's still weird. I think big cities would find that strange. I thought critically, but if I was being honest, I had to admit that even in Phoenix it would cause gossip. Which, like, that would cause gossip anywhere? 'Cause it's weird. Like, I realize in anime they try to make it not weird, but it's still weird. Which ones are the Cullens, I asked. They don't look related. Oh, they're not. Dr. Cullen is really young, in his 20s or early 30s. They're all adopted. The Hales are brother and sister, twins, the blondes, and their foster children. They look a little old for foster children. They are now. Jasper and Rosalie are both 18, but they've been with Mrs. Cullen since they were 8. She's their aunt or something like that. That's really nice of them, for them to take care of all those kids like that when they're so young and everything. Which, to me, is kind of a questionable statement, but whatever. I guess so, Jessica admitted reluctantly, and I got the impression that she didn't like the doctor and his wife for some reason. With the glances she was throwing at their adopted children, I'd presume the reason was jealousy. Which, like, I'm sorry, but what is Jessica jealous of? The parents for. If she wants to date Edward so badly, why is she jealous of the parents? Does she also want to be their child because she's poor? Because, like, same though. Come here, Cullens, give me money. But, like, do her parents not love her? I don't know. It's just confusing. I think that Mrs. Cullen can't have any kids, though, which, like, really does well to establish Jessica as, like, kind of a gossip. Perhaps slightly malicious gossip, she added, as if that lessened their kindness. Throughout all this conversation, my eyes flickered again and again to the table where the strange family sat. They continued to look at the walls and not eat. How odd. Have they always lived in Forks, I asked. Surely I would have noticed them on one of my summers here. Yeah, they would have been the only people whose names you can remember. No, she said in a voice that implied it should be obvious even to a new arrival like me. They just moved down 2 years ago from somewhere in Alaska. I felt a surge of pity and relief. Pity because as beautiful as they were outsiders, clearly not accepted. Here, I said, maybe they're dicks like you, 'cause they sure seem to be. Shockingly enough, if you refuse to talk to people, they don't want to talk to you anymore. Relief that I wasn't the only newcomer here, and certainly not the most interesting by any standard. And here I wrote, you never were. As I examined them, the youngest, one of the Cullens, looked up and met my gaze, this time with evident curiosity in his expression. As I looked swiftly away, it seemed to me that his glance held some kind of unmet expectation. "Which one is the boy with the reddish-brown hair?" I asked. You really couldn't think of a better description? I peeked at him. Like, you could have just put his position. Hair color's weird. I peeked at him from the corner of the eye, and he was still staring at me, but not gawking like the other students had today. He had a slightly frustrated expression. I looked down again. That's Edward. He is gorgeous, of course, but don't waste your time. He doesn't date. Apparently none of the girls here are good-looking enough for him. She sniffed, a clear case of sour grapes. I wondered when he'd turned her down, which, is so bitchy. That is catty. Especially because she says, I bit my lip to hide my smile next, which, what even? Are you this desperate for male attention that you're gonna fight over a guy that you think is hot with a girl that you literally just met? Ridiculous. Also because, hiding a smile really implies, along with, the clear case of sour grapes and turning her down, that, it implies that she thinks Edward would, date her? When before she was having such low self-esteem, she could never be worthy, which, what? How can you look at a man that is so hot you're comparing him to an angel, and then go, but me, even though I've just spent, the past chapter telling you how awful I am, and I could never deserve love. He'd probably date me, yeah, because I'm new and interesting. What? Sorry, but that's just the vibe I got. Then I glanced at him again. His face was turned away, but I thought his cheek appeared lifted, as if he was smiling too. See, they both think Jessica being rejected is funny, so they clearly belong together. After a few more minutes, the four of them left the table together. They were all noticeably graceful, even the big, brawny one. It was unsettling to watch. The one named Edward didn't look at me again. I also think it's weird to refer to another human as the one, instead of a name, or the boy, or the stranger, or the guy I just found out was named Edward. I sat at the table with Jessica and her friends longer than I would have if I'd been sitting alone. I was anxious not to be late for class on my first day. That's literally one of the few things you can use to excuse that you were late for class. One of my new acquaintances, who considerately reminded me that her name was Angela, had biology 2 with me the next hour. We watched class together in silence. She was not shy. She was shy, too. Here I wrote, you're not shy, you just think you're better than everyone. Because that's the only vibes I get from this chapter. When we entered the classroom, Angela went to sit at a blacktop lab table exactly like the ones I was used to. She already had a neighbor. In fact, all the tables were filled but one. Next to the center aisle, I recognized Edward Cullen by his unusual hair, sitting next to that single, open seat. As I walked down the aisle to introduce myself to the teacher and get my slip signed, I was watching him surreptitiously. Just as I passed, he suddenly went rigid in his seat. He stared at me again, meeting my eyes with the strangest expression on his face. It was hostile, furious. I looked away quickly, shocked, going red again. I stumbled over a book in the walkway and had to catch myself on the edge of a table. The girl sitting there giggled. Which, I don't know, most people don't usually laugh at that much at people tripping unless it's especially funny. I'd noticed that his eyes were black. Coal black. Mr. Banner signed my slip and handed me a book with no nonsense about introductions. I could tell we were going to get along. Of course, he had no choice but to send me to the one open seat in the middle of the room. I kept my eyes down as I went to sit by him, bewildered by the antagonistic stare he'd given me. I didn't look up as I set my book on the table and took my seat, but I saw his posture change from the corner of my eye. He was leaning away from me, sitting on the extreme edge of his chair and averting his face like he smelled something bad. And here I put, lol. Inconspicuously, I sniffed my hair. It smelled like strawberries, the scent of my favorite shampoo. It seemed an innocent enough odor. Maybe he just doesn't like the smell of strawberries, man. It's fine. I let my hair fall over my right shoulder, making a dark curtain between us, and tried to pay attention to the teacher. Unfortunately, the lecture was on cellular anatomy, something I'd already studied, and I said, haha, so smart. I took notes carefully anyway, always looking down. I couldn't stop myself from peeking occasionally through the screen of my hair at the strange boy next to me. During the whole class, he never relaxed his stiff position on the edge of the chair, sitting as far from me as possible. I could see his hand on his left leg was clenched into a fist, tendons standing out under his pale skin. This, too, he never relaxed. He had the long sleeves of his white shirt pushed up to his elbows, and his forearm was surprisingly hard and muscular beneath his light skin. He wasn't nearly as slight as he'd looked next to his burly brother. And that's because I'm under the impression that Emmett is built like a bear. He's just a bear. The class seemed to drag on longer than the others. Was it because the day was finally coming to a close? Or because I was waiting for his tight fist to loosen? It never did. He continued to sit so still, it looked like he wasn't breathing. What was wrong with him? Was this his normal behavior? There we go. I questioned my judgment on Jessica's bitterness at lunch today. Maybe she was not as resentful as I thought. Not just that, lol, just assuming the woman was in the wrong. It couldn't have anything to do with me. He didn't know me from Eve. I said, oh no, definitely not. You can't just dislike somebody on sight. Watch me. I peeked up at him one more time and regretted it. He was glaring down at me again, his black eyes full of revulsion. As I flinched away from him, shrinking against my chair, the phrase, if looks could kill, suddenly ran through my mind. Honestly, you could have just written if looks could kill, and implied that he was looking at you meanly. At that moment, the bell rang loudly, making me jump, and Edward Cullen was out of his seat. Fluidly he rose, and he was much taller than I'd thought, his back to me, and he was out the door before anyone else was out of their seat. I sat frozen in my seat, staring blankly after him. He was so mean. It wasn't fair. Like, what? For what? Not wanting to sit next to you? For thinking you're stinky? He didn't even say anything to you. He just didn't fawn over you like everyone else that you claimed was so annoying and awful. I began gathering up my things slowly, trying to block the anger that filled me. Why is she mad? He just didn't talk to her. Because he apparently doesn't talk to anybody except his family. That was incredibly obvious from the lunch scene we saw, and from how Jessica talked and implied. Why did she think she would be special? Especially since she's such an ooh-woo, shy, low self-esteem girl. For fear my eyes would tear up. For some reason, my temper was hardwired to my tear ducts. I usually cried when I was angry, a humiliating tendency. Which, like, same. Aren't you Isabella Swan? A male voice asked. I looked up to see a cute, baby-faced boy, his pale blonde hair carefully gelled into orderly spikes, smiling at me in a friendly way. He obviously didn't think I smelled bad, which I did laugh at. Bella, I corrected him with a smile. I'm Mike. Hi, Mike. Do you need any help finding your next class? I'm headed to the gym, actually. I think I can find it. That's my next class, too. He seemed thrilled, though it wasn't that big of a coincidence in a school this small, which, yeah, fair. Although, in my school, it was half semester sports and half semester not, and then rotated that way. So, it was kind of weird to find somebody with the same schedule with immediately. We walked to class together. He was a chatterer. He supplied most of the conversation, which made it easy for me. He lived in California until he was 10, so he knew how I felt about the sun. It turned out he was in my English class also. He was the nicest person I'd met today. But as we were entering the gym, he asked, "So did you stab Edward Cullen with a pencil or what? I've never seen him act like that." If there is nobody else in your grade named Edward, you do not need to call him Edward Cullen. He's not that important. And if there is somebody else in your grade named Edward, you can call him by his last name. We did that to our Alexes. I cringed. So I wasn't the only one who had noticed. And apparently that wasn't Edward Cullen's usual behavior. I decided to play dumb. "Was that the boy I sat next to in biology?" I asked artlessly. "Yes," he said. "He looked like he was in pain or something." "I don't know," I responded. "I never spoke to him." "He's a weird guy." Mike lingered by me instead of heading to the dressing room. "If I were lucky enough to sit by you, I would have talked to you." I smiled at him before walking through the door's locker room. He was friendly and clearly admiring, but it wasn't enough to ease my irritation. "What, the hot boy didn't want to talk to you?" Wah. The gym teacher, Coach Clapp, which I cannot take that name seriously, found me a uniform but didn't make me dress down for today's class. At home, only 2 years of PE were required. Here, PE was mandatory all 4 years. Forks was literally my personal hell on earth, which, same for having to take gym for 4 years. I did not, thankfully. Although, your school provides you uniforms? Ours did not. I watched 4 volleyball games running simultaneously. Remembering how many injuries I had sustained and inflicted playing volleyball, I felt faintly nauseated, which, nobody is that clumsy. The final bell rang at last. I walked slowly to the office to return my paperwork. The rain had drifted away, but the wind was strong and colder. I wrapped my arms around myself. When I walked into the warm office, I almost turned around and walked back out. Edward Cullen stood at the desk in front of me. I recognized again that tousled bronze hair. He didn't appear to notice the sound of my entrance. I stood pressed against the back wall, waiting for the receptionist to be free. He was arguing with her in a low, attractive voice. I quickly picked up the gist of the argument. He was trying to trade from 6-hour biology to another time. Any other time. Which, to be fair, if it's, within the first week of school, yeah, that's fine. You can totally do that. I just couldn't believe that this was about me. Maybe it's not. It had to be something else. Something that happened before I entered the biology room. The look on his face must have been about another aggravation entirely. It was impossible that this stranger could take such a sudden, intense dislike to me. And I said, "Lol, because you're so likable." But also that just happens sometimes, honey. There's a difference between you not having a personality and you being likable. Sorry, this paragraph, man. Maybe the dude just had a migraine. The door opened again, and the cold wind suddenly gusted through the room, rustling the papers on the desk, swirling my hair around my face. We've already used the word swirled to describe the air twice in this chapter, I notice. The girl who came in merely stepped to the desk, placed a note in the wire basket, and walked out again. But Edward Cullen's back stiffened, and he turned slowly to glare at me. His face was absurdly handsome, with piercing, hate-filled eyes. For an instant, I felt a thrill of genuine fear, raising the hair on my arms. The look only lasted a second, but it chilled me more than the freezing wind. He turned back to the receptionist. "Never mind then," he said hastily, in a voice like velvet. "I can see that it's impossible. Thank you so much for your help." And he turned on his heel without another look at me and disappeared out the door. I went meekly to the desk, my face white for once instead of red. One, you didn't blush that much in this chapter, and two, nobody blushes that much ever. And handed her the signed slip. "How did your first day go, dear?" the receptionist asked maternally. "Fine," I lied, my voice weak. She didn't look convinced. When I got to the truck, it was almost the last car in the lot. It seemed like a haven, already the closest thing to home. Then I just said, "Wow, screw Charlie." I had in this damp green hole. I sat inside for a while, just staring out the windshield blankly. Also something I do when I get home and I need to decompress. But soon I was cold enough to need the heater. So I turned the key, and the engine roared to life. I headed back to Charlie's house, fighting tears the whole way there. This boy did not talk to her in class, and she is almost crying on the way home. What? You had the entire school fawning over you and welcoming you there, and you're just like, "But that one hot boy didn't want to talk to me, and it's just the worst thing ever." My summary of this chapter is, so, arrives at school, thinks all the plebs are boring and annoying, and she's already studied everything and or is super smart anyways, so there's no issues except trigonometry because everybody hates math. Her only glaring flaw is that she's really pale, and that she's super clumsy and shy, ooh-woo. Edward doesn't immediately fawn over her, and in fact doesn't want to talk to her, which is just so horrible that she almost cries because she was just expecting him to like her for some reason. This, no joke, made me laugh incredibly. I finished this chapter and sat there and laughed because it was so funny. Like, what is happening? Let me know if any of you have almost cried because a random human you just met didn't want to talk to you. If it was me, let me apologize. I don't like talking to strangers. It was just so funny. Oh my god. It was great. So, I think that is the end of chapter 1. I have no clue how long this recording has ended up being. Sorry for all my coughing and sneezing. I might have the energy to edit it out, but probably not because I'm just always dying and incredibly disorganized, as you well know. Hopefully by the time I record another longer video like this, I will be more functional voice box wise, nose wise, coughing wise. But right now we're just kind of having a sucky time with it. But anyways, thank you for watching. Let me know if you would indeed like more of the Roasting Twilight series. I'm having a lot of fun, so I hope you are too. Let me know if you have any specific requests for anything else you'd like to see in the next video. And with that, Scholastically Natalie is out.